You know that feeling when you're waiting for an important text and you keep checking your phone every 30 seconds? Yeah, imagine that. Except the message is coming via a 14-year-old kid on a bicycle, and he might not show up for hours or days or ever. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1925. You're standing in your living room, and there's a knock at the door. You open it, and there's a boy, couldn't be more than 15, wearing a Western Union cap that's slightly too big for his head, holding a small yellow envelope. Your heart immediately drops into your stomach, because here's what nobody tells you about the telegram era. That knock at the door could mean anything. A new baby, a business deal, someone asking you to come home immediately, or death. The telegram delivery boy didn't just deliver messages, he delivered fate itself, one yellow envelope at a time, and he was probably making about $3 a week doing it. This isn't a story about a quaint communication method that got replaced by something better. Not really. This is a story about how an entire system, built on urgency, youth, and bicycles, fundamentally shaped how people experience time, distance, grief, and joy. The kind of thing that didn't just fade away, the kind that got murdered by technology. But there's something even stranger happening beneath the surface. Here's what you need to understand. Before the telegram delivery boy, urgent news traveled at the speed of a horse, or a ship, or human feet. You'd think people would just accept that news took time, right? That if your brother in California needed to tell you something important, you'd find out about it when his letter arrived 3 weeks later. And that was just life. But humans have never been good at accepting limitations. In the 1830s and 40s, if you needed to send an urgent message across any real distance, you had options, and they were all terrible. You could send a letter and hope the postal service didn't lose it, which they frequently did, or pay someone to hand-deliver it, which is expensive and unreliable, or use a carrier pigeon if you were fancy and lived somewhere that supported that, which has limited range, and occasionally eaten by hawks, or just wait and hope the information wasn't time-sensitive. The thing about human communication is that we've always treated it like it should be instantaneous, even when it physically couldn't be. We wanted to collapse distance, to make geography irrelevant, to reach through space and time and tap someone on the shoulder. Then Samuel Morse figured out how to send electrical pulses through a wire, and suddenly, for the first time in human history, information could travel faster than a human body. This is where things take a turn. May 24, 1844. Samuel Morse sends the first official telegram from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore. What hath God wrought? Pretty dramatic for a tech demo. But here's the thing, he wasn't wrong to be dramatic. Within 20 years, there were telegraph lines spanning the entire United States. By 1866, there was a cable under the Atlantic Ocean. Messages that used to take weeks or months now took minutes. But there was a problem nobody anticipated. The telegraph system created information, but it couldn't deliver it. Think about it. You're sitting in a Western Union office in Manhattan, and a telegram comes through from Mrs. Elizabeth Morrison at 247 West 23rd Street. The message is tapped out in Morse code, transcribed by a telegraph operator onto a piece of paper, and then, what? You can't email it to her, can't text it, can't even call her because telephones barely exist yet, and definitely aren't in most homes. Someone has to physically carry that piece of paper from the telegraph office to her front door. Enter the telegram delivery boy. Now, here's something that might surprise you. Western Union didn't want to use children. They tried using adult messengers first, professional couriers, grown men who could be trusted with important, sometimes sensitive, information. But adults were expensive. They demanded real wages. They weren't fast. And they had this annoying tendency to think they deserved dignity and fair treatment. You know what was cheaper, faster, and easier to exploit? Kids. Let's talk about these kids for a minute. Most telegram delivery boys were between 12 and 16 years old. Some were as young as 10. They came from poor families, immigrants mostly. Though plenty of native-born poor kids did it too. Irish, Italian, Polish, Jewish kids trying to help their families make rent. The job paid somewhere between $2 and $5 a week, depending on the city and the year. That's roughly equivalent to $6,250 today for a full-time job. Working 6, sometimes 7 days a week, they worked in all weather. Rain, snow, summer heat that made the streets shimmer. They rode bicycles or walked, covering anywhere from 20 to 50 miles in a single shift. Their feet hurt. Their legs ached. In winter, their fingers went numb holding onto handlebars. And they wore uniforms because it is important. Western Union and other telegram companies understood something about human psychology. People trust uniforms. The boys wore dark blue or gray wool suits with brass buttons, caps with company logos, leather messenger bags slung across their shoulders. The uniform did two things. First, it gave them authority. A 14-year-old kid could knock on a wealthy person's door and be taken seriously because he represented Western Union, represented modernity itself, represented the miracle of instant communication. Second, it made them visible. You could spot a telegram boy from a block away, which meant if you were waiting for news, good or bad, you'd see him coming. That might be the most psychologically torturous part of the whole system. Here's what nobody tells you about the telegram era. It created a completely new form of anxiety. Before telegrams, if something bad happened to someone far away, you wouldn't know about it for weeks. By the time you found out, the crisis had either resolved or you'd already missed your chance to do anything about it. The grief was delayed, sure, but so was the panic. Telegrams collapsed that distance, but only partially. Now you could know something terrible had happened within hours, but you still couldn't respond instantly. You couldn't pick up a phone and call, you couldn't video chat, you couldn't even be certain your response telegram would reach them. You were stuck in this psychological no man's land, aware of the crisis, unable to immediately help. And then there was the waiting itself. Imagine you sent a telegram to your sister in another state asking about your mother's health. You know the telegram will arrive later today. You know she'll probably send a response, but you don't know when that response will come. Could be in 3 hours, could be tomorrow, could be never if something went wrong. So you wait. You listen for footsteps on your porch. Every time someone walks by your house, you glance at the window. Every knock on any door in your building makes your heart race. And if you see a Western Union boy walking down your street, your stomach drops because he might be coming to your door or he might walk right past. Both possibilities are torture. This is where the psychology gets really dark. Let me tell you what every telegram delivery boy knew but rarely talked about. A significant portion of their deliveries were death notifications. Your son died in the war, your father had a heart attack, your wife was in a train accident, come home immediately. The boys could often tell what kind of telegram they were carrying before they even knocked. Death telegrams had a particular form, a specific weight. Some were marked urgent or family emergency. Others you just knew from the address. Military families during wartime, hospitals, addresses that had recently received other telegrams. And here's something that'll mess with you. The telegram boys were often the first people to witness grief in its rawest, most immediate form. They'd knock, the door would open, they'd hand over the envelope and they'd watch, because they had to wait to see if there was a reply, as the person's face changed as they read and as they understood. Some people screamed, some collapsed, some just stood there, silent, the telegram trembling in their hands. Some asked the boy to read it to them because they physically couldn't make their eyes focus on the words. The boys were instructed to be polite, neutral, professional. They were children delivering adults' worst nightmares, and they were supposed to act like they were delivering groceries. You'd think this would have made people hate the telegram boys, right? Shoot the messenger and all that. But something else happened instead. People tipped the boys, sometimes generously, not always, and certainly not when the news was terrible, but often enough that boys would develop routes they preferred, addresses they hoped to be assigned. And more than that, people remembered them. Mrs. Kowalski on 3rd Street would always offer cookies. Mr. Chen at the laundry would ask about school. The O'Briens had a dog that would run to greet the messenger before the family even knew he was there. Because here's what rarely gets acknowledged about the telegram delivery system. These boys became a regular presence in people's lives. The same kids delivered to the same neighborhoods, day after day, week after week. They learned the streets, learned the people, learned who tipped and who didn't, who was kind and who slammed doors. They became, in a weird way, part of the community infrastructure. Think about what that means. A 13-year-old immigrant kid barely speaks English, family lives in a tenement, has access to the private communications of doctors, lawyers, businessmen, society ladies. He knows who's sending telegrams to their mistresses, who's desperately trying to close business deals, who's begging family members for money. The boys were supposed to be invisible, forgettable, just delivery mechanisms, but they saw everything, and they weren't supposed to talk about it. Western Union had strict confidentiality policies, but they were kids. Of course they talked to each other, to their families, to their friends. The telegram boys were one of the era's most reliable sources of gossip and insider information, which brings us to something darker. Let's be real about what this job actually was. Child labor, dressed up in a brass-buttoned uniform. The boys worked 10, 12, sometimes 14-hour shifts. They worked in dangerous weather. They navigated city streets full of horse-drawn carriages, early automobiles, streetcars, all of which could and did hit them. Bicycle accidents were common. Broken bones, concussions. One boy in Chicago died when a streetcar hit him while he was making a delivery in 1919. He was 15. They got sick from being outside in all weather. Pneumonia was was a frequent killer. Frostbite in winter, heat exhaustion in summer, and then there were the predators. This is the part historians didn't talk much about until relatively recently, but it was well known at the time. Telegram messenger boys were frequently targeted for sexual exploitation. Men would send fake telegrams to themselves, wait for the boy to arrive, then assault them. Or they'd offer money, food, a warm place to stay. These were poor, hungry kids working long hours far from supervision. Child welfare advocates in the 1910s and 20s wrote extensively about this. They called the messenger service a training school for vice. They documented hundreds of cases. They demanded regulation, supervision, age restrictions. Western Union's response? Essentially, not our problem. The company would occasionally fire boys who were found in improper situations, which is a horrifying way to say we're blaming the victim of child sexual abuse. But they didn't meaningfully change the system, didn't provide more supervision, didn't raise the minimum age, because the system was profitable exactly the way it was. But then something remarkable happened. The telephone didn't kill the telegram immediately. That's not how technology works. Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone in 1876, but it took decades for phone networks to spread widely. Early phones were expensive, required dedicated lines, and were mostly used for local calls. Long-distance calling was prohibitively expensive well into the 1920s, so for a while, telegrams and telephones coexisted. You'd use the phone for local stuff, telegrams for anything urgent and distant. But by the 1920s and 30s, phone networks were expanding rapidly. Long-distance calling got cheaper, more homes had phones, and here's the thing about phones that made them superior to telegrams for most purposes. They were immediate, two-way, conversational. With a telegram, you'd send a message, wait for a delivery boy to carry it, wait for the recipient to send a response, wait for another delivery boy to bring that response back. Could take hours, could take days. With a phone, you picked up, asked the operator to connect you, and you were talking within minutes. The telegram's advantage, speed over distance, was being eroded. But Western Union and the other telegram companies still had one thing phones couldn't match: physical delivery of a message, a piece of paper you could hold, keep, show to others. For certain kinds of communication, formal announcements, business contracts, legal notifications, telegrams remained the standard through the 1940s and even into the 50s. Then came World War II, and something unexpected happened. During World War II, telegrams became primarily associated with one thing: military death notifications. The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son. Those yellow Western Union envelopes became objects of absolute terror. Families of soldiers would see a telegram delivery boy approaching and literally hide, refuse to answer the door, pray he was going to a different house. The boys delivering these telegrams, many of them not much younger than the soldiers who died, would sometimes have to knock multiple times. Wait, knock again. Sometimes neighbors would come out to convince the family to open the door. One former telegram boy interviewed in the 1980s said he delivered hundreds of death notifications during the war. He said most families knew what it was before they even opened the envelope. They could tell from his face. After the war, Western Union tried to rebrand. They pushed singing telegrams as a fun, celebratory product. They offered greeting telegrams for birthdays and anniversaries, but the damage was done. In the popular imagination, telegrams meant bad news, emergency, death. And meanwhile, technology was racing ahead. By the 1960s, telegram delivery boys were becoming rare. The job still existed, but barely. Telex machines let businesses send typed messages directly to each other without an intermediary. Long-distance phone calls were cheap enough that most people used them for anything urgent. The postal service had gotten faster and more reliable. Western Union tried to adapt. They introduced mailgrams in 1970, messages sent electronically to a local post office, then delivered by regular mail carriers. No more messenger boys needed. In 1974, Western Union hired its last telegram delivery boy in most U.S. cities. The few who remained worked mostly in rural areas or handled special deliveries. By the 1980s, even those were gone. Western Union sent its final telegram anywhere in the world on January 27, 2006. The message was from the company's CEO, acknowledging the end of an era. 145 years after Samuel Morse sent "What hath God wrought?" the telegram was dead, killed by the telephone, finished off by the fax machine, buried by email. But here's what gets me about this whole story. The telegram delivery system was exploitative, dangerous, built on child labor and corporate indifference to child welfare. Nobody should be nostalgic for the actual conditions these kids worked in. But there's something about that yellow envelope, that knock at the door, that boy on a bicycle, that meant something specific about how we experienced communication. When you got a telegram, it meant someone thought the message was important enough to pay extra for, urgent enough to require immediate transmission, significant enough to put into formal, written words that would be delivered by hand to your door. It meant the message mattered. Today, we're drowning in communication. Texts, emails, DMs, notifications, Slack messages, Discord pings, TikTok comments, Instagram replies. We get hundreds of messages a day, most of them meaningless, none of them requiring a 14-year-old to ride a bicycle through a rainstorm to deliver. Everything is instant, which means nothing feels urgent. Everything is easy, which means nothing feels important. We wanted communication to be faster, cheaper, more convenient, and we got that. We got all of it. We can send a message to someone on the other side of the planet and receive a response in seconds, but we lost something in the exchange. We lost the weight of the envelope, the formality of the message, the physical presence of the messenger, the way your heart would race when you saw that Western Union cap. We lost the idea that some messages are worth waiting for, and maybe that's the real story here. Not just about telegram delivery boys or Western Union or technology replacing human labor, but about how the speed of communication changes the meaning of the communication itself. Those boys on bicycles, carrying yellow envelopes through rain and snow and summer heat, they weren't just delivering messages. They were delivering significance, weight, meaning. They were the physical manifestation of someone saying, "This matters enough to reach you now, not later, not eventually, but now." And when they knocked on your door, whether the news was good or bad, whether you'd been waiting for it or dreading it, you knew one thing for certain. Someone thought you needed to know, urgently, immediately. That moment, between the knock and the opening, between seeing the envelope and reading the words, that was a kind of human experience that doesn't really exist anymore. We traded it for convenience, for speed, for the ability to send a crying, laughing emoji to someone in Tokyo while we're sitting on the toilet. I'm not saying it was a bad trade. I'm not even saying we should go back. I'm just saying, the next time you get a text you don't bother to read, or an email you immediately delete, or a notification you swipe away without thinking, remember that there used to be a kid on a bicycle who'd ride through a blizzard to bring you one sentence, who'd wait at your door to see if you needed to send a reply, who'd carry your words across the city like they were made of glass. Because maybe the messages weren't more important back then. Maybe we just treated them like they were. And maybe that difference between messages that matter and messages that exist is worth thinking about. That's not just history. That's poetry in motion. If this hit home, if you've ever wondered about the systems we lost and the things we gained, stick around, because there are 1,000 more stories like this one. Small, forgotten pieces of how we used to live that explain everything about how we live now.